Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, new details about a Chinese spy honey trap. Newly declassified FBI files reveal more about the relationship between former California Congressman Eric Swalwell and Chinese spy Fang Fang. 30 U.S. academic institutions missiles a year. Newly declassified FBI files detail how the Chinese Communist Party is influencing U.S. politics, especially through one particular method, cultivating relationships before a politician gains an important position and waiting until he becomes influential. When this is done on a large scale, it will eventually pay off. The FBI files focus on the relationship between former California Congressman Eric Swalwell and Chinese spy Fang Fang. The FBI documents show Swalwell admitting to agents that he had a sexual relationship with Fang before he became a congressman in 2013, but Swalwell denies giving her classified information in exchange. The files say Fang later used her influence to get interns hired to work on Swalwell's campaign and in his office. She also offered to reimburse Swalwell's campaign donors, a move that violates the law. The FBI found out that Fang was connected to Beijing's intelligence service, and her connections in Democratic Party circles in California were extensive. There were also reports that Fang had sexual relationships with at least 2 Midwestern mayors whose identities haven't been made public. A Trump administration official says Chinese spies may have infiltrated other federal and state offices through planted interns. Swalwell became a congressman in 2013. He resigned earlier this year amid several allegations of sexual assault. The Pentagon has ordered 30 academic institutions to audit their ties with foreign entities. The institutions may have ties with Chinese and Russian entities. NTD's David Lamb reports.
The Pentagon has ordered 30 academic institutions in the U.S. to immediately review their collaborations with foreign entities of concern. The institutions were not publicly disclosed. The Department of War saying on Monday it notified the institutions. They risk losing future federal research funding if they don't abide. The Undersecretary of War says the Department of War has zero tolerance for academic partnerships that compromise our national security. This comes as lawmakers increasingly point out deceptive practices carried out by communist regimes targeting Americans.
The CCP's 2017 National Security Law makes clear there is no such thing as a truly private company in China. Scientific discoveries, commercial technologies, and academic partnerships are expected to serve the priorities of the CCP.
The audits would target university relationships with the 130 problematic foreign entities on the Pentagon's list, mainly entities from China, Russia, Iran, and rebranded Confucius Institutes.
Basically, that say we shouldn't be partnering with these institutions that are affiliated with the Chinese military or have sanctions or human rights violations. And there's these lists available. And unfortunately, many of our research public dollars have gone to fund initiatives joining with people on those entity lists.
The Department of War says it's working with partners in Congress. The institutions must report back to the Pentagon by August 31st. David Lamb, NTD News.
A Chinese robotics giant is facing new scrutiny over the technology behind its machines. Researchers and a former U.S. defense official say the company based designs on innovations funded by the U.S. military. Here's a closer look.
In the race to mass-produce robot dogs, China is beating the United States. Philadelphia-based Ghost Robotics developed its Vision 60 robots from Army-funded academic research in quadruped movement. The company wasn't alone. China's Unitree Robotics, among the world's biggest producers of humanoid and canine robots, based designs for its most successful four-legged machines on the same U.S. military-funded breakthroughs. Researchers involved in the projects told Reuters.
This is technology that at its core was developed at U.S. universities, funded by U.S. taxpayer dollars.
Gavin Keneally is the CEO of Ghost Robotics, which has supplied the U.S. military with its Vision 60s, for surveillance and search operations.
There were papers published, and then these papers were very closely studied by Chinese companies like Unitree, and these principles were put to work and then scaled in an exceptional way using amazing manufacturing and supply chain technology, to where now you see companies like Unitree and other companies in China are shipping way more legged robots than American companies are.
Unitree did nothing underhanded in using the research, which was openly published to stimulate progress, a common practice. But it helped propel the company to global market dominance. And the company's imminent Shanghai stock market debut has drawn frenzied demand. Unitree did not respond to requests for comment. It is said in public statements that its products are intended for civilian use. And in 2022, the firm, alongside U.S. companies, pledged not to weaponize robots. But another company's robotic wolves were displayed at a military parade in Beijing last year. And Chinese state television has shown an armed version of a Unitree robot alongside Chinese troops. Publishing U.S.-funded research presents a broader issue for American firms competing with Chinese manufacturing, which has developed at lightning pace over the past decade in industries critical to national security, backed by subsidies and a tolerance for heavy losses. Here's Hugh Grant Chapman, a fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS.
I think the biggest factor in China's advantage for developing its robotics industry is its massive industrial base, its vast ecosystem of manufacturing, factories, and things that provide both kind of demand-side support for its robotics industry, as well as cheap access to all the components it needs to manufacture those. When I look at where the U.S. has fallen behind, I see that loss and hollowing out of the manufacturing sector as being a really big driver of why the kind of corresponding national security applications have fallen behind as well.
The only way to escape China's chokehold on the robotics supply chain is to work with international partners, says Keneally.
There's no way we're going to do this completely on our own as the U.S. We need to work closely with our allies. In particular, at Ghost, we work very closely with companies in Korea and Taiwan and Japan, where they have some of this manufacturing and supply chain expertise. So there's absolutely no path forward without them.
The U.S. Federal Communications Commission says it's preparing the country to, quote, deliver on President Trump's vision to lead the world on the next generation of technologies. Chinese humanoid robots face financial challenges. More than 300 companies are heading to Beijing this week to show off their latest humanoid robots. But it's raising a big question. Will these machines actually turn a profit? Here's more.
The World Robot Conference runs Wednesday through Sunday with roughly 2,000 exhibits and more than 150 new products expected. Investors are pouring money into the industry, but profits have yet to be proven. Many of these humanoid robots cost up to $70,000 each, according to Berlin-based think tank Merix. One Chinese brokerage estimates a robot would need 2 years to pay for itself. And that gap is raising concerns about whether the industry can support hundreds of competing companies. Earlier this year, several major robotics firms have reported significant losses while spending heavily on research and development. UB Tech, for example, saw its humanoid robot revenue jump more than 2,200% last year. But despite that growth, the company still reported a loss of roughly $110 million. Analysts say companies that cannot prove their robots create real value for customers could eventually be pushed out. Robotics analyst Georg Stieler estimates more than half of humanoid robots produced this year could end up collecting training data instead of doing real work. So while the demonstrations may look impressive, the real test is whether these robots can eventually turn a profit.
China-made vehicles are largely absent from the U.S. market due to tariffs and restrictions. However, Waymo, a company that develops self-driving car technology, has imported some vehicles made in China despite tariffs exceeding 100%. NTD's Sean Marshall has the details on why these vehicles are so sought after.
Chinese vehicles have been effectively blocked from U.S. markets with tariffs at 127%. But that hasn't stopped Alphabet, Google's parent company, from importing Zeekr-based Ojai robotaxis into the U.S. for its Waymo fleet.
I think that's kind of the funny thing, is that while things are so cheap to be developed and built in China, producing somewhere else like in the US, it could cost more than 100% to build those cars here, even something equivalent. It's just more difficult. We have more laws with things like OSHA and things like that. We have to pay minimum wage. And in China, they can bypass a lot of these laws and they can use all sorts of different methods to make things as cheaply as possible, plus the fact that it's backed by the Chinese government, which again reduces the cost for them to produce it and also for people outside of the U.S. to buy it.
Senator Bernie Moreno of Ohio has been fighting against Chinese imports over security and supply chain issues. He says, I think if you substituted the word China with Iran today, you'd say, that's nuts. Of course, we don't want any of our auto supply chain to come out of Iran. That would be insane. Or out of North Korea or Russia. Sean Marshall, NTD News.
The U.S. Navy is spending nearly $23 billion to increase production of one of its key long-range strike weapons. A new contract with Raytheon aims to push Tomahawk production above 1,000 missiles a year. The 7-year agreement with Raytheon is worth $22.9 billion. The production is expected to rise from roughly 60 missiles a year to more than 1,000 annually. Raytheon says it has already delivered 3 times more Tomahawks in the first half of this year than during the same period last year. Hung Kao, acting secretary of the U.S. Navy, says, quote, guaranteeing our naval and joint forces have the lethal firepower they need to deter aggression and protect the homeland is paramount. The Department of War says the investment aims to speed up weapons deliveries and strengthen the U.S. munitions industrial base. Coming up, China is seeing 0 investment deals from 10 of the world's biggest private capital firms this year, compared with a dozen deals just 5 years ago. So what's driving the sharp decline in foreign private investment? And U.S.-South Korea joint drills are underway, targeting North Korea and China. Why did President Trump order a reduction in military exercises, and will it impact relations with South Korea?
This latest sort of kerfuffle between President Trump and South Korea is not something that just came out of the blue.
More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. 10 of the world's largest private capital firms have made no new equity investments in China so far this year, at least not publicly. That's according to the Financial Times. Why are foreign investments in China declining? And what does new data say about where the Chinese economy is headed? NTD's Juliet Song has the story.
A drop in foreign investments flowing into China. In just 5 years, the number of investment deals that some of the world's biggest buyout firms made in China went from a dozen down to 0 this year. Milton Israti is the chief economist at Vested, a financial communications agency. He says the deals likely dissipated for 2 reasons.
The only growth in China in these days is in the government-sponsored high-tech electric vehicles area, and that means that the government is being much stricter about investment flows than it would have been if it was the production of toys or shoes or things like that. So the government is interfering, the government in Beijing is interfering much more with the investing, and of course the investors are very concerned about that because their main object is in how to get out when the time comes.
Israti noted that the trend is also a reflection of the investment environment in China not doing well.
So we've had reports recently that even private investing in China, this is quite aside from the government, private investing from private firms on capital projects is way down. And this is an indication that there just aren't that many opportunities in China the way the economy is today.
There are investment opportunities in areas like AI. But this is where the Chinese regime appears conflicted. On one hand, Beijing has restricted foreign investments in sensitive industries, forcing Meta to unwind its $2 billion acquisition of Chinese-founded AI firm Manus. But on the other hand, Israti says China also desperately needs more money to build AI and other high-tech industries, so it is looking for funds.
Beijing has allowed the issue of more panda bonds in the Hong Kong market, which is a way of channeling foreign capital into China. They've also encouraged Chinese firms to go abroad to issue bonds and not so much equities, but bonds in order to get money.
It's a difficult situation for China to be in.
They both want the money and want the control. And of course, in China, they might be able to have their way both ways. But with foreigners, no, they're just not going to put the money in if they don't think they can get it out and they don't think they can control it. So they've dried up a source of funds that they really desperately need.
Zooming out, data released Monday shows China's GDP growth slowed to a 3.5-year low in the second quarter of this year. Of the engines driving the economy forward, only exports are going strong. The rest are struggling, especially the property market.
Property values have fallen 25%. That has really hit Chinese homeowners, and that's a large part of the population. Their household net worth has shrunk, and that means they're not consuming.
He noted China's economy is distorted, and over-reliance on exports for growth presents a risk. Following the tariff war, China has been shifting its exports away from the U.S. and selling more to other countries.
Those sources are not going to last forever. The Europeans are already putting on tariffs, and countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and Vietnam have complained that their own development is being hamstrung by China's presence. So depending on exports has a short future for China, and that's all it has now.
Though for the United States, Israti says tariffs have, in some respects, insulated the country from China's economy and made it less vulnerable to China. Juliet Song, NTD News.
President Trump reduced joint military exercises with South Korea that kicked off Monday. In a Truth Social post Sunday, the president linking his order to what he characterizes as Seoul's refusal to help with Iran. President Trump said his order was tied to South Korea's refusal to help with Iran. Take a listen.
When I called him, I said, would you like to give us a little hand? We don't need help with Iran, but if you'd like, give us a hand with Iran. He said, no, thanks. And I said, wait a minute, we have 39,000 soldiers over there guarding you from Kim Jong-un, your next door neighbor, and you're not going to help us on a very easy military operation in Iran? That's strange. No, we'd rather not get involved. I say, well, why are we involved in helping you?
The Ultra Freedom Shield drills started Monday as scheduled and are set to run for 10 days. It's not yet clear how President Trump's order could affect training already underway. To discuss the U.S.-South Korea relationship, I spoke on Tiffany Meyer Tonight on Monday with retired Marine Colonel Grant Newsham. He's also a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy and the author of When China Attacks. Now, President Trump has again expressed frustration with South Korea's position during the Iran war. Has that deteriorated the defense alliance and the broader relationship between Washington and Seoul? If so, how serious is that situation?
Well, it has somewhat, of course, because the South Koreans, said, well, now we don't want to help you in the Persian Gulf or with Iran, without saying, even though we get a ton of our oil from the Middle East, we're very happy to have you all take care of this. The South Koreans are not the only ones who said this. Japan said it as well. And just about every other one of America's erstwhile friends said the same thing. The South Korean ambassador ought to go tell that to the Rotary Club in Youngstown, Ohio, and see how they take it. So this has caused some friction between the two allies. But this has been long in coming. This isn't the only thing that has caused some friction in the U.S.-South Korea relationship. South Korean leftists, starting just for reference, go back to Moon Jae-in, the president of South Korea from about 2017, 16 or so to 2022. And he was a hardcore leftist. And he was not very happy that the Americans, for example, put THAAD anti-missile batteries into South Korea. He got very close to China. He sort of put on a good face sometimes, but he was a hardcore leftist. Lee Jae-myung is even worse, if you can believe that. Lee has said, well, what China does to Taiwan, we don't really care. He's referred to U.S. forces in South Korea as an occupying force since his administration took over They've been picking a fight with the Americans over management of the DMZ, the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. They have also got a prime minister whose older brother has immense influence, said that the Trump administration is the apex of Yankee imperialism. The prime minister himself was imprisoned as a younger man for anti-American, anti-South Korea activities, as was the head of the then head of the Democratic Party of Korea. So this administration in South Korea and the previous one before President Yoon, who was impeached and imprisoned, these were very serious leftist administrations that did not really care all that much for the United States, even though most South Koreans do. So this latest sort of kerfuffle between President Trump and South Korea is not something that just came out of the blue.
Asian media outlets, meanwhile, are reporting that South Korean officials are hoping to ease tensions with the U.S. through diplomatic efforts. Do you think this can be resolved through diplomacy, or is President Trump expecting more from Seoul?
I think he expects more. I don't know what exactly the South Koreans would say about this, particularly given that track record. And they have never explained the comments that they have made about American forces as occupiers, the apex of Yankee imperialism. They've never explained that sort of thing. And I'm not sure that sweet talk is going to do it unless the Americans are just willing to accept it and say, okay, we understand, everything's fine. But in terms of addressing that underlying issue of hardcore South Korean leftists trying to take the country where most people don't want it to go, in South Korea or in the United States, I don't think that diplomacy is going to solve the problem, but rather some really changed behavior.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For on-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.